So can you get stronger by working less? We're going to dive into all of this and more about strength training protocols in today's episode of 50 Days to Rebuild, the series where I do 50 minutes of exercise and read 50 pages of a physio book in a day in an attempt to rehab myself. This is day 28. Jumping straight into what I learned for today, so I've been reading The Science and Practice of Strength Training by Zatsiorski. We're going to jump straight into the requirement for an increase in strength, which is to fatigue the motor unit. They argued that because of this, we basically need to train slow and hard to increase strength. Now the big caveat here is that our strength gains are going to be much better if we're not tired. So yes, we're fatiguing the motor unit, but we don't want to overall be tired or fatigue the muscle too much while we're working out. We won't be able to lift as much weight, so we won't be able to generate as much strength gains. Because of this, they recommended that if we're doing heavy resistance, we want about 4 to 5 minutes of rest time, which is probably a lot more than most people do a rest period for. And beyond that, if we're doing max weight, about 10 to 15 minutes of rest, which aligns with what like Pavel Sassolin would talk about in Greasing the Groove. That would be his recommendation as well, so it's nice to see that alignment. Now, because we need to not be tired when we're doing these exercises, the authors were very clear that there's a certain hierarchy of what should be done first throughout the training, so that we can do sort of the higher risk stuff, the things that require more energy first. So on this point, things like higher coordination exercises, so think like Olympic lifts, like a snatch, right? It's so explosive, it's also requiring so much coordination that we want to do that first. The other thing here is that anything with a big muscle group we want to start with, so not starting with accessories. And on a similar vein, dynamic before slow. So again, snatch, even though that is a lot of coordination, but if we're doing something explosively, it's better to start with that than something that we're doing slowly. Now, a very interesting point that the authors made was that fatigue effects are specific to the muscle group and the type of work. So if I fatigue my biceps, it doesn't mean that I can't do a tricep exercise in the quote-unquote rest period before I come back to work on my bis. Similar vein, they said that if we'd done strength and then we went and did like a sprint or something, like something that was a different type of work. So it's not just strength training, it's like, oh, now I want to do endurance or like something explosive. There was nothing wrong with doing that either. Like we were working on a different system. So it sort of wasn't translating the fatigue over in the same way. Obviously there's going to be global fatigue if you're doing like a sprint or something, but the idea still stands. Okay, so we're saying that with things like heavy resistance we need 4 to 5 minutes of rest, but what is heavy resistance? What is your max lift going to look like? So they were pretty clear on the different types of training here. So for heavy resistance, they said anywhere from 60 to 85% of your max 1 rep. And they were pretty big fans of this type of training for muscular development, really sitting up like the higher end of that spectrum, like that 85%. But they did say that this only is really for like someone who expertly has the coordination, and that people tend towards burnout if they work out in this way. So doing like 1 to 3 reps, that it's so intensive that you can't just do it constantly. And they did recommend like sort of mixing in some days of like 60% so that we get like a different load, partially I believe to sort of try and beat accommodation, but also so it's a bit of variety. And what should your 1 rep max be? Now, I know you're probably thinking, well, it's as heavy as I can lift, but they're clear here on like a 1 rep training max. So if you looked at purely weightlifting, so say like how heavy can somebody deadlift in a competition, they said 90% of that should be the training max, right? So that's 100% 1 rep max for training. Obviously it's a bit weird because not every sport is going to be weightlifting, so how do you identify that would be a little bit more difficult. But generally, yeah, just another 10% off. Now there was a section here around the different types of motor units, so fast twitch and slow twitch. It was quite intriguing. They're talking about different ways of going about training that. And that specifically, if we looked at slow twitch, that generally speaking it would require more maintenance, just to maintain the level you're at, not even to improve. And the reason for this was the activation hierarchy, I guess you would call it. So basically when we're activating a muscle, it's going to start small and then increase. Like it's not going to try and use more than it needs to. And the first thing that's really going to try and activate are the fast twitch fibers, which also produce a larger force. So that's why they're more capable of those more explosive, heavier lifts. But as you go on, it's the slow twitch that comes on later, right? So you're less likely to have trained it, so it's not getting as much volume, and then it's going to need more maintenance as a result. The last thing that I just want to touch on that I learned, which was really interesting for someone who is not exactly the tallest person, is that people that are shorter generally have a better relative strength, meaning that to their body weight, they can lift more, so they're generally better at things like calisthenics and any sort of sport where you are just moving your body, like gymnastics or rock climbing, right, where we're not like throwing big weight. That's always cool because it's, I guess, few and far between other benefits for short people. And those are sports that I've always been quite interested in, so it's nice to know that there is some inherent advantage there. Moving on to what I did on the exercise front of things today. So I only have two things I really want to touch on. So one is the bird dog. Unfortunately, what I'm seeing here, I'm really not loving, which is that my elbows look like they're hyperextending, and it's kind of terrifying. They are definitely going past neutral. I have no idea why this is happening. Because I've also had this hyperextension happening at my low back, I tried working on the psoas, and tried to do like an eccentric activation. Actually went quite well, so I did this slumped psoas activation. I did something that in hindsight is probably a little dumb, which is I tried to add weight to my ankle to do this eccentric sort of extension from this slumped activation. Why I'm saying that's kind of a bit dumb is that I haven't really done much spine movement. In fact, everything I do around the McGill Big Three is about stabilizing the spine, not picking at the scab of the injury. So just add weight on randomly is probably a bit of a foolish jump, but live and learn, I guess. On the plus side, it didn't hurt. And just quickly on the hinge exercise I've been doing, it just felt a little easier. I guess I'll just chalk this up to having done it for a little bit now. I'm not too sure why it's feeling better, but I'm happy that it is. And yeah, that about wraps it up for day 28. I hope that you found this interesting. I definitely found this strength protocols very intriguing, and I'm keen to read more. Yeah, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.